Good evening, and welcome to my update here on our little recap. And as I had pointed this out in my post on my community wall on my other channel, is that we basically have three topics tonight. For one, is just to take a look at the Donbas battle, what's going on there, and the advances or non-advances which were made and what situation we got there. We have been able to get a much clearer picture in this yesterday, and I went through the information which comes from reliable sources. In this case, it is the military academy, the Theresian military academy of the Austrian army, and they're providing a briefing on those things, which is very militarized, the way you would basically get the information more or less from the command center, presented what battalions and what man size and what weapons and that sort of stuff in pretty clear detail. The briefings are conducted by Colonel Dr. Reisner, a very capable man, and so that plus whatever information we have been getting in, I will talk about here. I will get to this in a minute. Then we wanted to talk about our democracies in the West, if they're resilient, and where we are, and what these democracies, our democracies, can withstand in light of what was going on. Not just with the war, but also with the leak at the Supreme Court, and that sort of stuff. And then the third thing would be the subject of what I had posted there about my Facebook posts from August, September of 2014. And then we may get to talk about my friend Dr. Alexander Kokeyev, which I haven't talked in a long time. He lives in Moscow. He is a Gorbachev man, meaning that he was a Perestroika glasnost guy. And as you probably know, Putin is not quite in line with that group of people. He kind of respects them, but they have been pushed to the side pretty much. And I will talk about this. I do not know. I'm trying to keep these videos in about 30-minute length, so we may not get to this topic tonight with Facebook and Dr. Kokeyev, but we may have to postpone this and move this into another video, maybe in the next couple of days or so. And before I start to talk about the battlefield, there is a battle situation. There's a general, just to give you a general idea about the Red Army, and to get a better understanding of what we're looking at here. When the wall came down in November 9th in 1989, the German reunification then was accomplished fairly quickly, and it was concluded by October 3rd, or finalized by October 3rd in 1990. The monetary union, I believe, came into effect earlier in July 1st, 1990. And at that point, after October 1990, everything started to be migrated together in this whole thing. And of course, the East German police force, underwent changes, now being under a new constitution. And the states, the actual 4 states in East Germany, were reorganized and all of this stuff. So the police forces were reorganized. People with a past association with the Stasi were let go of, and West German police higher ranks started to teach the remaining police force in East Germany the policing in a democratic state. And that went pretty well, for the most part. At that point, Germany still had, now that reunified Germany, we had about 300,000 Soviet soldiers still stationed there from the Red Army, and the same amount of probably US soldiers, maybe a little bit more. And of course, a lot of them, they wanted to go home, and the Soviet Union was not capable of taking them back. And the reason why was because they didn't have the facility in the Soviet Union to basically to accommodate 300,000 soldiers. So that was done in stages. West Germany started to pay then Boris Yeltsin, first Gorbachev and then Boris Yeltsin, to build new facilities. And in this transition and in the police, changes, the incidences, the East German police, the Volkspolizei, had experienced from, say, like 1946 or 1947 when they came into existence until 1989 when they had to deal with Soviet or Red Army soldiers which had gone AWOL. And the structure in the Red Army was then looked at, and it was clear the Red Army was always based on the different nationalities. So the highest status had the Russian soldier. Then came the Ukrainian and Belarus soldiers, and then came the rest of it. And that was, expressed with hazing and, all sorts of these harassment kind of things. We would say totally, completely politically incorrect. So a lot of these soldiers, these young conscripts, couldn't deal with this, especially from the ethnic minorities out of the Soviet Union. And some of them committed suicide. One case in Dresden wound up where a young soldier took off with an AK-47 and 1,000 rounds of ammunition and basically holed himself up in a multi-tenant building in the basement. And of course, the tenants called the police, Volkspolizei. They got there when they found out it was Russian. It was a Red Army soldier. Then the Stasi was called in, and the military police. And the military police, they just went in and they killed the guy, and he went back home in a box. So this is basically, when we're looking at this constellation, this is basically the basis for the Soviet Union breaking apart as it did, and Gorbachev could not hold this together. And everything else resulted out of this. So that we're having now the Ukrainians fight with the Russians is sort of a underlying thing which had brewed up, has been cooked up in the Soviet Union since the October Revolution of 1917. So you do the math. So this thing has been going on for a long, long, long time. 1917, so this was over 100 years ago, 114 years ago, 113, 114 years ago. And this is the reason why we saw these ethnic minorities breaking away. Georgia, you had Chechnya, okay, you had Belarus. They're still aligned with them because they were like second grade, and Ukraine was sort of, but it was never really, it was always the Russia is number one. Russian soldiers, number one. Everyone else came after that. And this is the kind of thinking we're having. So we're dealing here with Russian nationalism. Besides of what the Soviet, Putin is accusing the Ukrainians of, you have this in Russia very much so. If you have ever watched other YouTubers, Russian YouTubers who do their stuff in English, especially the gals, they're very proud of their country and they're portraying all the nice things, which is true, but it is very national, very national. Russia this, Russia here, Russia the other thing. You don't really see this in the Western world too much, that the patriotism is not that much there anymore, for a variety of reasons. Um, you know, we say we like our barbecue, and then you have a thing about a barbecue, but this is not because it's America, it's we have a barbecue, or whatever it is. Um, so this is kind of the this, from my understanding, has been in place for a long, long time, basically ever since this started with that revolution, and especially since Stalin, even though he was from Georgia, came into power, and this kind of originated in that time area there in the late 1920s, 1930s. The gulags contributed to this, this whole oppressive system, and that has pushed these people over there to a very strong sense of nationalisms, to their ethnic regions where they're living in, in the greater part. And Russia is a pretty big country itself with different ethnic groups, and they're getting along. But within this, there's the main Russian group, the European Russian group, is the predominant race, even though they never asserted that. That is sort of kind of implied in this. And the military was structured that way. And because they had the conscripts, they had compulsory military service for God knows how long, and even today they do. The Russian young guys, they fared better in that year or year and a half, and the ethnic minorities, they had a much harder time during that time. And of course that, forms you as a person. It gives you an opinion when you grow up. You're 18, 19 years old. You kind of want to belong to a community. Oh yeah, and the other thing is, in this, is the sleeping quarters of the Russian army, of the Red Army in East Germany, was such that they had dormitories, and they had 100 beds in one dormitory room. This is, even today, if you have a dormitory room, you may have not more than 10 people, or maybe 20 at the very most. And they had 100 soldiers in there, and virtually no privacy whatsoever in that entire time. And the Russian officers, they had a little bit better, not the enlisted, see, now that happens. We have the enlisted, or the well, I will let you know when I remember it. Anyway, the Russian officers had slightly better accommodations. The food wasn't good. The medical care wasn't good. They virtually had no free time. They were not allowed to leave the bases to go, around in East Germany. They had to stay on base, and the only time they got off base was during a maneuver and that sort of stuff. So this is all this what has contributed to this, what we have now in that war. And of course, in the Russian army today, the way that is structured, there's a lot of guys who had, gotten into the military service in the 1980s when that was still there. And it was the Red Army, and they never did any ideology cleaning or any of that stuff. When it collapsed, it was just taken over, and then it moved on. So in essence, we're dealing with the Red Army and everything that came with it. And now let's go and talk about the battle here, the battle news. And I'm already 15 minutes into this here, so we may get only this topic here resolved tonight, because I'm 15 minutes into this. The current situation in the Donbas is as follows. We have 48 battalions, Ukrainian battalions, south of a town called Izyum, I think. Izyum, is that pronounced? And there are approximately 68 battalions, Russian battalions, facing them. The Russian battalion, one or two Russian battalions have been trying to get around Izyum, first through Izyum down to come from the north, going south, to attack the entrenched 48 battalions. They're completely entrenched in 3 to 4 layer deep trench systems, completely worked out. The Ukrainians did this already years ago in anticipation for this. So they have built a fortified system in there, which is going to be very, very difficult for the Russians to crank open. Anyway, the one battalion couldn't get through Izyum. There's a river or a little creek called, what was that creek called? Sversky Donets, that is the river or that little creek. There's a bridge going when you get south out of Izyum into the battle area, which is an open field basically, or several hundred open fields. That is several square miles in size, what we're talking here about, where they are entrenched in. There's only one road bridge over that little creek, and they couldn't get over it because the Ukrainian army had that sealed off. There's 2 forests to the east and to the west of Izyum. So what the Russian Red Army now, or the Russian army had to do, the battalion, is they were fighting their way through the forest. And forest is very difficult for armored vehicles, heavy vehicles, because you can't get easily through it. You have to cut trees down, you have to make the room and everything else, all while you're actually fighting. So forest operations are very, very difficult. And they finally made it now to that little creek, and they were able to set up 2 platoon bridges, and they went over. So now they're on the other side of the river, facing the actual northern flank of these 48 battalions, and with the other ones going on the east side. So they have now the top and that side. They haven't been able to make any advances to Russians on the south side to encirculate them completely. And the overall situation in the Donbas is that the Ukrainian army has 81 battalions, and the Russian Federation has 93 battalions. That is now all regular soldiers and heavy artillery in every way, form, and shape. That's what we're looking at. And the general wisdom in warfare is, if you're in the situation like the Russian army is, you need to have a manpower advance of 4 to 1. So you would need, if they have 81 battalions, the Ukrainians, you would need 4 times the amount. That would be 320 battalions. They have only 93. And the reason why they are so low is because they had, first of all, these 93 battalions, half of them had gone up to that Kiev route in that long column. And of course, we know that they lost a lot of men, probably 15,000 at least out of those battalions. And some of them were left there and were sent over to Belarus to get restructured, and some of them were then redeployed to the other sources further down southeast, basically, where that is going on, into the Donbas region. So right now, as we're looking at 93 overall battalions on the Russian side and 81 battalions on the Ukrainian side. And the ensuing encirclement is 48 battalions basically entrenched in probably a 50 square mile, 100 square mile area, 2 open fields between 2 or 3 towns in the middle there. It looks like World War I, and 68 battalions now north flank, south flank, and on the east flank trying to get west. The idea would be to come over on the north side and coming from the south side, encircling the 48 Ukrainian battalions, cutting them off from the supplies, and then basically getting them under artillery fire. Now, just to give you an idea, is the entire distance that one battalion traveled or was able to fight their way forward, we're looking at approximately 4 miles. It took them two weeks or something like this to just get to that forest and over the little tiny creek they got there, maybe 40, 30 feet wide at the most, a few feet deep. And now they're on the other side of the river with their artillery and their tanks and whatever. And they're shooting now at these people, at these heavily fortified Ukrainian forces. And they have basically set up a circular defense on there with other troops or battalions being available to them to counter offset anything the Russians want to do. And this is right now where the main battle is going on. So the Russians are basically firing the artillery mostly from the north right now and from the east into this area with these multi-rocket launcher systems they have. We used to call them Stalin organs. They have probably, 12 rockets in their RPG type things. And they're not very precise. So what you do is you fire the whole thing through, and then you change the angle and you hope you're going to hit something. So for most of the times, the Austrian army had drone footage available from where these things actually hit. And they're very difficult to use on trench warfare because you cannot aim them very accurately. Because they're stacked on top of each other, so each one of them flies a little bit different. And they're trying to cluster this thing. But in trench warfare, with the way the Ukrainians have to set up, this is not going to be very effective. And the Ukrainian army, of course, has one huge advantage, is that they know all of this equipment the Russian got, because they have the same equipment. So they know exactly of what these rocket launchers can do and what they cannot do, these Stalin organs. And the same is with the tanks and everything else. The advantage now is on their side with these Javelin missiles they got, and these, suicidal drone things, they're kamikaze drones, and that sort of stuff. The thing the Ukrainians need at this point is these Gepard tanks. And I do not know on how exactly now the situation is with the ammunition, because the cannon itself is made in Switzerland by Oerlikon. Oerlikon was the developer of the gun system. They have a flak system too, their own, but the gun is the main thing in this. And of course that ammunition is made in Switzerland too. It is also my understanding that there's a company, or there's companies in Bulgaria which can make those 35 millimeter rounds, because the Romanian army uses those Gepard tanks too, and they didn't want to buy the very expensive ammunition, 35 millimeter ammunition, out of Switzerland. So they went to the Bulgarians, which used to make ammunitions for the Russians years ago when it was the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. And there's one or two facilities which can produce these 35 millimeter rounds. This is my understanding at this point. So there shouldn't be any issues with this. The systems are more or less complex with the radar, and of course, the trigger sequence on how you do this and everything else, that will take some practice. But I'm pretty sure these young people they have in the Ukraine, if they can adapt very easily to these electronic things, probably faster than my generation, because they have already, with these cell phones and everything else, computerized equipment, they will be able to comprehend this pretty quickly, I'm sure. But this is right now where the battles are going on, besides of the steel plant, where they have now removed the remaining civilians out of it. And we will see what the Azov battalion is going to do. I'm not quite sure on how they're getting resupplied. They must have been able to get resupplied, because they have been there now for 4 weeks or 8 weeks or something like this. So there must be some mechanism in place where they can get resupplied, and that will make it very difficult for the Russians to actually get them out. Of course, the great thing would be for the Russians to parade those, whatever, 800 soldiers through Moscow on Monday, but I think that's not going to materialize. They did it with 100,000 men of the Sixth Army. They had to go on their way to the Gulag through Moscow, and they had to march by the Red Square, and that was the thing. They had to walk by in front of Stalin. That was the thing. So there something like this, that would be nice, but this is only 800. The Sixth Army was 100,000. This is by far more impressive. 100,000 versus 800, maybe 600. Who knows how many are left of them? And they haven't come out of there yet. So theoretically, if you just wanted to close the chapter on it, you would just basically level the building, and that's the end of it. Then that's it. And there's no more steel plant, and everything else went with it. What was in it? Cat and mouse and everything. And so that would be it. If you want to parade them, then you have to do a combat in there, man to man, and that's going to be a bloody undertaking. I can tell you that right now. Especially if the Ukrainian forces can resupply this Azov battalion in there with food and ammunition, then that could go on forever. I mean, literally. So this is something I'm not quite clear about the locality. There's not much reporting on this. We do not know what is coming in. We do not know exactly of. It's a house-to-house fight in this, and that is always very, very tricky to assess, because you can have one building belong to one side, and the building next to it or across the street is already with the other side. So a block can be multiple divided positions, basically, among two different forces. And that makes it very difficult. And then tunnels come into the picture, and airdrop supplies and that stuff. I don't know. Maybe they're getting the supplies flown in by drones, at night, and the Russians cannot detect them. Then you can keep this whole thing going. This is what they would have needed in Stalingrad, was like 1 million of these little drones, everyone carrying 5-pound packages in there. This thing in Stalingrad would have lasted till Doomsday too. They still would be sitting there probably trying to get to each other. That is the big question. That is something we have to wait and see. This is pretty much as far as I got tonight in terms of the battle. There's not much more going on. I'm not going to get into the subject of whether or not the American command, probably not, supported the Ukrainian army with information intel on, the sinking of the Moskva and the other two frigates or whatever that was, what they just recently shot up there, or sank, or at least set on fire. That I'm not sure. It was reported, but then there really wasn't anything reported officially from the Pentagon where you can actually believe it. It says internal sources have reported this, that intel came from there. That would basically make America an immediate participant in this war to begin with. That was, we have talked basically everything. With the 93 battalions the Russians have right now in that whole area down there, in the Donbas and the surrounding areas to Mariupol. Looking versus 81, there's not much action going to happen. They're going to start shelling whatever they can shell with the artillery until they run out. We will see on how fast the Allies can bring heavy equipment in, especially into this region over there in Izyum, that especially the flak, to get rid of the air superiority of the Russians. That is something which has to be broken, and the Gepard was exactly designed for that particular purpose, what they're needing that for. Depends on how fast the bureaucrats in Europe can move. That's they're not gonna be doing overtime here because of that stuff. I guarantee you that. But we will see on how fast they can be moved in. I keep my fingers crossed with that 35 millimeter ammunition that they can get it from Bulgaria. And otherwise, the Brazilians are using that. Maybe the Brazilians have ammunition which could be transported, airlifted over into this region pretty quickly. So at least these Gepards could start being used in the field. At this point, it's a numbers game, it's a trench warfare, and it's a material fight, really, and who can supply the most material to this. Whoever's going to prevail with the material and man in this is going to win this. And at the going rate, they're probably going to wind up killing each other. One side might have a little advantage over the other, but there's no real victory here any time to be expected in this picture what we got on the battlefield. This is entrenched. This can go on for a very long time. With the World War when it went on for 4 years basically, with the entrenchment really starting in 1916 more so. Probably the early beginnings were 1915 when the front lines became hardened, and then the stagnation came, and then the entrenchment came. And you're going to see this here too. Eventually, the Russians are going to be where they are right now. They're going to entrench once there's heavy artillery reaching that particular area over there. Then you're going to see the Russians starting to entrench to protect their equipment and men. And then you have a trench warfare. That's for sure. Otherwise, at this point, it's a single-directed shelling, artillery barrage, basically on the fortified areas, trench areas of the Ukrainians. That can go on for some time until the Russians run out of ammunition or equipment. Depends on how many drones the Ukrainians can get to, destroy the artillery and javelins and that sort of stuff. Oh, the other thing is what I wanted to mention is the Russian Air Force had taken out about 6 transformer stations in the what is that called now? The mountain region over there. Beskids Mountains. That is that mountain range on the west side of the Ukraine where Poland, Slovak, Hungary, and Romania basically are connected in that little corner there. And the main railroad transformer stations, they took only the transformer stations out. It's an electric train system which forces now the Ukrainian railroad into using diesel locomotives or steam. If they have steam locomotives, they could use steam locomotives. Basically anything non-electric. And that's going to be difficult because the Russians have bombed already the refineries, which means now you have to start shipping in fuel in order to support this whole operation. And that is already now strained because all of these countries in that area are getting their oil from the Russians. Now, with this scenario here in the committed battalions, it would be safe to assume that an invasion of the Russian forces into Poland or any of the NATO countries is pretty much out the picture at the moment. You could have missile attacks, you can have air raids, air attacks by air to a certain extent as far as they can get in, but a land offensive is basically out. There's no question about it. Russia would have to basically mobilize everything they can get, all hands on deck basically, in order if they wanted to do this. And I'm not so quite sure if they're going to do this or not. And like I said, the Russian people are not going to be that excited either about having a general mobilization for the entire country. The 3,000 tanks I had talked about in my other video, they're basically in the central region of Russia, that whole stretch facing Mongolia and China, that wide open area there. And if they have active battalions, of course, over their brigades. But those tanks are primarily the reserve for those battalions and brigades defending the country towards China and Mongolia. And that's one of their biggest fears. If they're starting to have to withdraw troops out of that area, that is basically an open invitation for China to move into that region. And then Russia would have suddenly a two-front war, which they probably don't want. And the Chinese armies, they have more men than anything else, and of course equipment. Who knows how good this is? Probably not much better than this what we've seen from the Russians. Probably even a little bit worse. But then the Chinese military is pretty crazy to begin with. So this would be a situation they don't want. So they're kind of tight on where they leave their strategic reserves, because they don't want to open up that white plain over there in the central region of Russia and then suddenly have 500,000 Chinese soldiers invading Russia and literally taking this whole central section all the way up to Siberia into their possession. Then they're basically out of raw materials. That's a potential danger. I don't think that the Chinese are going to do this, but today's world, you have no idea. They may just go ahead and do it if they think that the time is right. And of course, a lot of the long-range missile systems are stationed in these regions. So if the Chinese were to move very quickly in a blitz operation, overpowering these forces because the main battle groups, brigades and battalions had been withdrawn over to the Eastern Front, then that would be a possible scenario, and that would be very difficult. So now we have two subjects left for the other video, for the next video. That would be is our democracy in danger? Looking at our current overall stability and how willing our democracies are to stay democratic. Or are we seeing already, our politicians here, flirting with Putin and that kind of stuff. Even though they're saying we have sanctions, but we're still big lovers of gas and oil and this, that, and the other thing, which cannot be easily replaced, not so easily replaced, because there's nothing in place to replace it. We will see. We're going to talk about that basically. The whole corporate sector, they're losing big time right now with not being able to sell into Russia's, from underwear to socks to deodorant to condoms, wine, anything you can think of, any type of Western product we got, they cannot sell right now in it. There's approximately 18,000 40-foot containers being offloaded. This will ships en route to Russia through the Baltic Sea. They're now all anchored, these boats, in Denmark, and the Danes have carved up some land over there. They put steel plates basically out in the boondocks to store these containers, which were going with goods to Russia. And then the owners of the containers, or the content of the containers, have to figure out whether they got paid already by the Russians or not. They cannot deliver it. They would have to refund the money. They can't refund the money. The merchandise is now stuck. They have to find different buyers for that merchandise. And in these containers is about everything you can imagine. From car parts, from every major car manufacturer, to pork in refrigerated containers, and that's probably not going to be able to sit there forever. Perfume, the whole range of products. This goes into billions and billions and billions of dollars or euros, which is sitting there right now. And this is just the beginning. So this is going to have a ripple effect into our economy, and that's why I'm saying we have to take a real good look at our democracies here and see if our parties are still in tune, not just in the United States, but also in Europe, or if they would like a totalitarian system as well. There's a great danger for this, besides of insurrections, what the other side is pointing out. We'll get into this. And then we're going to talk about that Facebook post I did and about Alexander Kokeyev, his connection to Michael Gorbachev, and my dealings I had with him in 1988. And with that, you have a good night.